So now let's take a look at an entity in our veterinary clinic appointment scheduling application. We're going to look at the appointment class, which defines all of the information that we need to schedule an appointment for a particular animal with a particular doctor in a particular room. Now, the appointment class inherits from entity of T, which is a generic base class. In this case, it's entity of GUID, as you can see here. The GUID is defining the type of our identity property, our ID.
Right, and we talked about that earlier when we were looking at the structure of the different entities in this model. We wanted appointment to have a GUID because we're creating new appointments on the fly. So let's take a look at that entity-based class. And you can see a few things about this. First of all, it's an abstract-based class. So we can't just create an entity. We have to create something that is an entity, such as an appointment. And using generics, we're saying that the entity is going to use whatever type we ask it to, and that type is for defining the ID. So for appointment, we said entity is going to be using a GUID as its identity. I mentioned this earlier, why I would need GUID for appointment in this context, because I need to be able to create new appointments in this context, and I'm not going to be waiting for the database to generate that ID for me. So using a GUID lets me create that ID right up front as I'm creating that new appointment. So I'm giving it its ID. If you take a look at the constructor just checks to make sure that you're passing a value in, as opposed to only the default value of whatever the type is. So a default GUID or a default int if you're using an integer for the identity. There's also another constructor here, which is a protected constructor. Now, you've heard us talk about all our focus is on the domain right now, not about our persistence layer. But because I know that we're going to be using Entity Framework, that's the ORM we use, and I know that Entity Framework has a particular rule about constructors for our entity classes,